Thank you so much for tuning to my show, William Wallace for America, brought to you by Bond Arms, My Pillow, and Patriot Mobile. If you go to my website, you're going to find some links to those guys. Bond Arms, you're going to find some things you'll like at bondarms.com. My Pillow up to 80% off using the promo code WWFA, and the same promo code will get you free activation at Patriot Mobile. And check out some other of my sponsors on my site at williamwallace.net. Also, check into my Freedom merchandise. You're going to find some things on my Freedom merchandise that I think you're going to be happy to wear and display if you like freedom. You know, that's one of my favorite topics. I'm always on it, always talking about it. And today's show, I'd like to specifically talk about where we are losing freedom in America. You know, a lot of people don't really think about it, they take it for granted. People take our freedoms and liberties for granted, and they don't really feel they have to work for it. But what I would like for people to start realizing is not only where we're losing freedom in America and what freedom we're losing, but to be more aware of it so you know where to look at it because it's being lost everywhere and we're not looking at it all in the same way. You know, when we talk about freedom in America, most people think in terms of the First Amendment, the Second Amendment. On my show, I've been asking my guests the question, where are we losing freedom in America? Where do they think that we're losing it? And the answers may surprise you. In this podcast, I'm going to give you an overview of where I think we need to start looking, the rocks that we need to start moving, because like I said, when you start listening and looking, you're going to realize that freedom is being lost everywhere in America and you didn't even know it. And something to think about just before we get started, even our creator gave us more freedom and less rules and laws than our own government has. And while many people think of freedom as something that people on the right like to talk about the most, it's a human thing. We're born with the desire for freedom. We need freedom. Our Creator gave us freedom. We are endowed with our inalienable rights. We are guaranteed our freedoms in our Constitution, and it's part of our DNA. And we also need to start respecting other people's freedoms because the robbers of freedom don't care if you're a Republican, a Democrat, they don't care if you're a liberal or a conservative. That which is one of the biggest reasons we need to start being more respectful of all freedoms. The robbers of freedom will put us against each other to distract us while they steal all of our freedom, regardless of who we are or what our beliefs are. We just have to be more respectful of each other's choices. And I'm going to repeat, we have to be more respectful of other people's choices. Do not push our freedoms on them and find the things that we can agree on because that is where the solutions are. You don't have to give up your beliefs or your ideologies. You don't have to give up your passion to protect children or improve our schools. That's the beauty of freedom. We don't have to give up our own beliefs to respect others' beliefs. We just have to ask them not to force their beliefs on us. Don't force your freedoms on me, or don't expect me to, um, how shall we say, help you achieve your freedoms. That's up to you. That's up to you. If you believe in that, you go do that. I'm going to do my freedom over here. And if we all would learn to do that, we would have more freedom and we wouldn't be so divided and we'd find more solutions. We need to start with uniting on recognizing where freedom is being taken indiscriminately from all of us. So let's get started. I got some ideas, and these are just things, again, I could delve into all of these issues a lot further than I am in this show. But let's face it, I'm giving you an overview so you can be more aware of it. And once you're aware of it, once you start going down those rabbit holes, you're going to start seeing what I'm seeing, where freedom's being lost, and what my listeners are telling me in other interviews, which I hope you get to see some more of because I think when you hear them, you're going to find things that open your eyes even more. All right. Again, let's get started. Where are we losing freedom? We're losing freedoms in the bureaucratic agencies, the bureaucratic deep state, the bureaucracies in America is one of the biggest ways that we're losing freedom in America. You think the politicians are running roughshod over our Constitution or not listening to the people from time to time? Try what these guys, the bureaucratic agencies, are doing. They are further away from us than the politicians, and they can't be voted out. Once they get jobs, they almost can't be fired. They are creating rules, laws, and procedures outside of Congress. And these cushy government jobs that they have, with all the benefits that you can imagine, are costly to the American people, not only in the budget, but the unfunded liabilities after they work their 20 years and get paid for their retirement until they die. Who set that up anyway? It's a robber of freedoms, not just by the agencies and what they're doing, but because the government hires so many people and puts so many people through the bureaucratic agencies that they get all the benefits they get. And then they get, like I said, a long retirement and we're paying for it. Not that they don't deserve what they worked for, but I'm saying let's get to the start of the matter and go to the government that set it up and find ways to get rid of these huge bureaucracies. Again, this is an overview, but we can talk more about the individual bureaucracies and individual ways that our freedoms are being taken later. So don't think that these agencies don't have the power to change America or steal freedoms. Many of the people rather, at the top creating the rules are appointed by ideological hacks of the party that's in office at the current time. And while I'm not going to lay out specifics here, some agencies can infiltrate the ideological beliefs of whoever is at the top. Again, some agencies infiltrate our ideological beliefs, and those are coming from whoever is at the top or whoever's president by simply bribing states to change their laws with federal dollars, thereby piercing the veil of the 10th Amendment. Again, we'll go into some of these. Those are more like the Department of Education, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, EPA, some of the different rules and regulations that get passed on an ideological level by the people that are appointed by whoever's in office at that time, or maybe they're appointed and they get one of those cushy jobs and get to keep them. Again, this is an overview, and pardon my lack of specificity on some of this, but you're going to get the overall gist of it in such a way that I'm trying to do that's going to put these on your radar to look even further. The Board of Education and its teachings, ATF and the bump stocks, EPA, environmental laws like those on cars, the Bureau of Land Management, and the list of agencies go on and on and on. And some of the biggest things are attached to them. Again, the Board of Education, the Department of Education, rather, is able to infiltrate the state's school systems because of federal money. And that's how they get things to pass. The ATF passes all kinds of gun laws like bump stocks and all the different little rules and regulations. You can't have an arm brace because of an ATF rule. These are all things that were done outside of our Constitution, outside of Congress, circumventing the Constitution. And I'm going to say that again a couple more times for various reasons. The EPA has all the environmental laws, like those on cars, the Bureau of Land Management, those problems. Again, I'm repeating these things for a reason. I don't want a left wing or a right wing agenda running the country because I don't want either side running my freedoms because the pendulum always swings. And when it swings the other way and the other side has control, I don't want them having control of my freedoms with rules and laws or regulations that were set up in the bureaucratic agencies, because then it never is about freedom. It's about what the agency can do at that time or what it can get away with at that time because it operates outside of our Congress. I know some people will say, oh, it's set up with it had a congressional mandate. I get it. But if you look at what's going on in the agencies and the things that they're creating without having to go through Congress, it's going to be not only eye-opening, mind-bending, but you're going to start realizing and seeing freedom flying out the window. And it's not just about the rules they create circumventing the Constitution that is stealing freedom. It's the government waste on salaries, overhead, buildings, paper, computers, office furniture that they have to have budgets paid for by our tax dollars. And remember, if they don't use the budget one year, they buy up a whole bunch of surplus stuff, and then of course they'll auction it off later, or maybe not. But the reality is, if they don't use the budget, they lose the budget. So they spend the budget, whether they need to or not. This all comes down to not only government waste, but it comes down to our tax dollars. It comes down to our freedom. Walk down the streets of DC and look at all the buildings for agencies, departments, their employees, lobbyists, foreign countries, and you can see government dollars being wasted and funneled and directing where our money goes. That's right. In all those buildings that you see in DC, there's somebody in some of those things that's finding ways to funnel your tax dollars and your freedom out the door. What can we do? Start writing your congressmen and senators to repeal any rule, law, or procedure that either circumvents the Constitution or wasn't approved by Congress. That's just a start. There's a lot more to do in that, but that just gets you a couple rabbit holes to start looking down. Another place that we're losing our freedom, and I mentioned it before, is our school boards. Well, I said the Department of Education, but our local school boards. Yep, we're losing freedom in our local school boards because while there are many involved parents and good people running them, doing good and having the best interests of children in mind, even they have been infiltrated by ideological minded people that create little laws on the school boards and regulations, policies. It's a fancy word for a great way to steal your freedom. They're creating these things that line up with political narratives instead of just simple education for children, teaching, math, arithmetic. I know math and arithmetic are the same things, but teaching math, English, the basics that children need. Meanwhile, these guidelines and rules they create and the curriculums they bring in are connected to their ideologies that tie the local school system to national politics via the Department of Education. And they do it all in the name of equity, fairness, compassion, and of course, for the greater good. And there's always acceptance, which is how they convince so many people that either aren't paying attention or don't want to be seen as hateful or not accepting people for who they are. And so down the ideological road of potholes filled with narratives instead of a road that simply is paved with a pathway or a good road, if you will. Of course, in government, the roads are never great, but I would rather a paved road that provides education and guides young humans to just be independent thinkers with a fact-based education that teaches them a good work ethic, which I think is one of the most important skills, one of the most important arrows in your quiver that you can give a child is a great work ethic because it goes a lifetime. I did a show on this a while back. You can look that up if you like. But a work ethic is something that children used to leave school with because more than education, the studying, the hard work, the things that they used to get out of school would teach them a great work ethic, which I think is one of the most important things that school used to teach, which is now being lost because we're not teaching kids to be free thinkers and teach them how to work for it. We're teaching them that, the government's going to take care of you. The government's going to pay for your college. I could go on and on and on. Not to mention how many school boards become a conduit for money where architects, contractors, and engineers go to the boards to be able to get new schools built with your tax dollars and tax increases. You know, the ones that they claim are for the children. That's right. Your school boards aren't just about education. They're about, where people go to help the school board decide where to spend the money, which is, of course, again, an attack on your freedom because maybe you don't need a brand new school, but some engineer, contractor, or architect decided or thought that you did. I've heard of school board races around the country where people get voted off school boards simply because a powerful contractor firm, architect firm, brings in a national lobbyist or a national group to get them off because they didn't vote for the brand new school because they didn't want to have to require a tax increase to do so. But that's what happens. And so often those tax increases get put on the ballot on down or on unpopular times, we'll say, when people aren't paying attention and don't go vote, and the tax increases go through because everybody thinks it's for the children or the teachers. What can we do? Show up at every school board meeting and use every minute of time that you get at the mic and get your friends on the mic. And when they change the rules or they tell you that you can't go to the meeting, show up outside and peacefully protest. And when they still don't listen, vote them out. Get your friends, your relatives, everybody you can to get to the ballot boxes and vote out the school board members that you see are either operating in an ideological way. Maybe they're just there to keep the seat warm and uh, keep the pocketbooks of the contractors or architects that are looking for new schools in business. The Department of Education funnels money to the states for education and often attaches the money to the adoption of laws or that the state must include that certain curriculum be taught to get the money. Now, when I say rules or laws, I mean, of course, pertaining to education, but the reality is it's the same way that a lot of these bureaucratic agencies work. They pierce that 10th Amendment veil because they say, hey, we got this pocket of money over here. And if your state does this or meets these guidelines, you're going to get that pocket of money. The Department of Education is no different. And that's what's happening on why so many of this ideological narrative driven stuff reaches our local schools because it's coming from a federal level more frequently than we realize. Yes, it's happening in our local school boards. I get it, but it's we're being attacked. Our freedoms are being attacked from everywhere. Our children's freedoms are being attacked because they are the ones that are going to leave school without having a great education because they're being more narratively taught or ideologically taught than instead of just teaching them basic skills that they can use for the rest of their lives, skills that can earn them money, a living, and be able to operate in society in a very productive way. Not only does this government money pierce the veil of the 10th Amendment, and I'm repeating that over and over again because we need to be more aware of it because your state representatives, your state legislators are the ones that are voting to accept a lot of this federal money. And more often than not, the states need it for their budget because they've been used to it. They're addicted to it. It gets in there, it gets in the system, and then they can't operate without it. And all the while, it's stealing our freedoms. It's robbing our freedoms because when the federal government starts coming into our state, we lose our states' rights because the whole idea of having the 10th Amendment was so that way we could still fall back on our state to do the right thing or fall back on the freedoms in our state and be free of federal government oppression. Now, agendas that get taught in schools that reflect the ones at the top, that where the people at the top they get appointed by, like I said, the Department of Education, the people at the top they get appointed who want to push through these ideologies and narratives instead of just teaching kids facts. But then again, if you teach kids narratives or to think with their feelings instead of their brains, or you indoctrinate them with engineered facts for the purpose of control, You won't be, because that's their whole purpose, is because when you indoctrinate them with these narratives and you teach them to think with their heart instead of their mind, you your purpose of control, or how should I say, they are more controllable later, and thereby making it easier for government to steal their freedoms. Now, you might not think, oh, they're not going to steal their freedoms. Well, if they can control your mind because they've educated you with your feelings, they've educated you in a way to where you're not thinking with the facts. They've educated you in a way to be narratively programmed with ideologies instead of facts. Later, they're going to be able to control your thinking when it comes to being submissive to the government, being more willing to give up your freedoms, and handing over your security to the federal government. They're going to take care of you, right? We're going to get back to that more in a little bit. Free thinking people know even the basics, even the free people, even free people thinking people who just know the basics of education, they can't be controlled because free thinking people crave freedom, and free thinking people can't be controlled. And that's why the government doesn't want to teach free thinkers or how to think, how to critical think, how to be critical thinkers. They want you to think with your heart, ideological, so they can control you later. I'm kind of going all over the place and in little areas that come to mind on where we're losing freedom. But another place that we're losing freedom is HOAs, those old homeowners associations. I know the simple things around, well, don't go live in one. All too often, people end up in them, or one HOA moves in, or let's just say that it just happens to be an area that you absolutely love. So you move into some area that has HOA and you think, oh, the HOAs be controlled by my neighbors, people that think like me. They're here. We're all here for the same reason. We're going to, this is going to be great. We're going to, live in this place together and it's all going to be great. Well, don't live in one unless you want to get controlled by every Karen or Karen in training, or shall I say dictator in training. They are a prime example of how in Nazi Germany and elsewhere in Europe during World War II, you would get turned in for your beliefs to save your own self. I know it's an extreme example, but the reality is the neighbor that you thought you had a lot in common with will report you if you are growing one tomato plant too many in your backyard because the HOA says you can only have 3 and you've got 4. There are they are prime examples, all these rules and laws at HOAs, of how good people change when they get elected to public office. It's just a mirror. When good people get elected to public office, they oftentimes get that sense of feeling of control and power. And they use it not so much as a way because they become different. It does change them, I guess you could say. But what happens is, they go in with good intentions to do the right thing. Then they get that taste of power. HOA is no different than public office. And the HOAs are gaining momentum across the country, and don't think they weren't designed to change public opinions on things like sustainability or environmental issues. This is another rabbit hole that you can go down, and you can see where there are people that have proof that the HOAs were designed by bigger entities that want to perpetuate the narratives of global warming, environmental sustainability. Those ways that they get those bike paths to go to the middle of the road, so you gotta kind of drive kind of weird, and then when you want to make the right turn, you got to cross the bike path that maybe the biker feels safe in, and then there's a curb. It's crazy laws like this that come out of the HOA. This list goes on and on for miles, but we don't have time to go down those rabbit holes. An overview is all you're going to need to see it and follow your gut. Your local officials are often friends, neighbors. Um, this is going back more to our local government and the people. I kind of jumped ahead a little bit. You have to apologize there for a second. You know, we're going to go to another place where our freedoms are lost, and that's our local government. And again, my thinking there, I kind of jumped on to the next one when I started talking about elected officials being like the people who get elected to the HOAs. The list goes on and on for miles, and I don't have the time to go into those rabbit holes, but your local officials were often your friends at once. They're your neighbors, just like the HOAs. This is where I got off track. The local elected politicians are often people that you know in your community, and they run on God, family, country, better government, and lower taxes. And then along comes the splash park, the new soccer field. Then you see them with the parish or county. I live in a parish, or the county where you might live, and then you see them riding down the road in their car paid for by the local government, and it's paid for with your taxes. And I'll pause right there. The problem is our local elected officials, our local government, where we're losing freedom on a local level because of local politicians, are no different than the ones that are in DC. What happens is once they get in the system, they get swallowed up by a system of a way to do things the way things have always been done. They get swallowed up, and they become bad people. It's not that they were bad people to begin with. It's government is this behemoth. It's this old school. It's the old, it's the good old boys network, the way of doing things. It's that once an elected official gets in, they go, oh gosh, you know, if I want to get that road paved or that built, I got to do this. I'm going to have to, and then the negotiations start. And pretty soon, freedom and liberty are furthest from their minds. And they're thinking about how to get things done because the good intention is that they want to improve their community or their area like they ran on. But what ends up happening is the way to get things done in government is almost always never the best thing for the people's interest when it comes to freedom, liberty, and your tax dollars. And once they get swallowed up by a system of the way things have always been, why lower taxes when the money is needed? Because if you don't use it, you lose it. And if you don't decorate the community, they won't know you're decorating the community with your money. Yes, it becomes easier to just tax people than find ways to cut the budget. So it becomes the only way for them to stay in office is to facilitate your money. Government's only way to pay the bills is to tax you. And when the cost of goods and services go up, so do your taxes. And politicians don't find ways to cut it because, of course, John down the hallway needed a new laptop. Betty downstairs, had to order some extra paper for all the copies that had to be made. And it's just easier to realize, it's easier for them to accept the way government has been operating in their own local governments forever, even if it's robbing your freedoms. They don't think of it like that way. They think of it as, well, we got to perpetuate government because it's here for the people. The only way to pave the roads, pick up the trash, and do that is to keep it going. So they get swallowed up in a system of keeping it going. If you're on the podcast, I did an air quote around keeping it quoting. In other words, instead of them finding ways to cut the overhead or build business partnerships to get things improved in the community, it's easier just to tax you and say, it's for the children, it's for the community, it's for the old people, it's for our future generations, it's for the poor. If we all just share a little pain, it will be for the greater good. But the problem is that it never stops. It just keeps growing. And the growing taxes in your community and the property taxes and sales taxes and state fee and taxes and federal taxes are robbing us of our freedom every second we breathe because they're all collapsing in on us and suffocating us. Another freedom I like to talk about. Again, I'm kind of giving you the overview. We can go down all these other rabbit holes in bigger ways later. Another freedom we're losing is our medical freedoms are being lost through insurance companies that don't always want to pay. Now, I'm saying that abruptly in the beginning. I know we have personal responsibility when it comes to the contracts that we sign with our insurance companies. We have a copay. I get that. It's not really that's not the direction I'm really going in with this. Okay? But because you don't always know the exact cost oftentimes, which is why more and more states are passing laws to know these fees up front. There's a lot of hidden cost. You know the drill. When you go to the hospital, you have a little something serious, you end up with all these bills that you never knew where it was coming from, nor did you know it's and what's interesting is even though you know you're going to owe some or have some personal responsibility with your insurances or your insurance, you never know what the exact cost is going to be. You never know, are they paying all of this, some of that, and the bills start coming in. And then meanwhile, your care isn't always your choice or your doctor's because the insurance companies don't want to pay for everything. Maybe the hospital wouldn't get this approved. Then there's medical mandates, there's vaccine mandates. The list goes on and on. And when you mix in things like rules and regulations that are still hanging over from Obamacare, we have less and less insurance companies to choose from, which is, of course, a freedom that we have lost. And the narratives are driving us to get addicted to the pills. And what I mean by that is you think you got medical freedom. Well, there's tons of all these other ailments that are coming up, and there's a pill for everything. And the narrative and the marketing that's done to make you think a certain way is no different than the political narratives that are being done to get you to vote a certain way or divide us up amongst each other so we don't unite and find solutions instead of being divided up. The medical freedom community, the medical freedom aspect is absolutely no different. But don't worry about all the pills they're pushing that infringe on your medical freedom. You think you got freedom to choose those pills? Sure, you do. Doctors got freedom to prescribe them. But what about happens with your personal choice on your health? It gets limited outside of your insurance. And what I mean by that is I'm going to cover that here more in a second, but I'll kind of jump the shark a little bit on a thought I'm going to share with you in just a minute. When you take your medical care into your own hands and you choose ways to be able to take care of yourself that might be more natural, you get seen as an outcast. Your insurance might not cover it. So you lose a little bit of freedom for taking personal responsibility. And then, of course, when the pills come in, the side effects come in from the pills or the diseases, there's always another pill for that too. And if you try to take your own health in your own control, there's other ways because there's other narratives for that too that will label you some kind of a lunatic that doesn't get paid for. And meanwhile, I think that little area I've kind of discussed is a loss of freedom. I thought science worked through experimentation and finding what's right for you, but the medical community seems to think a little bit differently sometimes. Okay. Here's an example for you on kind of what I'm talking about, to be a little bit more specific. There's a company called Safe Blood. I've interviewed them on my show before. And Safe Blood allows you to donate unvaccinated blood so people who want unvaccinated blood can get it. And if you need unvaccinated blood, you can call them to get unvaccinated blood. Or if it's just a certain type of blood that you want from that has different standards. There are states in the United States, of course, that have banned the person's ability to be able to request blood from this company, or if they want to get their blood donated to them from somebody specifically that they want. There's states that have laws that keep them from being able to do that. That's taken away their personal medical freedom to make a choice that they want. And then, of course, when you turn 65 years old, you have to join the Medicare system. No choices there. It's mandatory. That is not medical freedom. But don't worry, the government's going to take care of you, right? Just like they do with Social Security. We're so programmed to expect it that we don't care anymore about how much we're being controlled by it. When I say we, I know it's not all of us, but collectively it is all of us. And if we don't get off this train where we are all responsible, the train is moving so fast that we can, believe it or not, but it's moving so fast, it's not easy to do, and it's headed off the tracks soon. Like I said, when I was talking, give you the example with Medicare that you got to do when you're 65. There's flood insurance. You don't have control. You don't have a choice on flood insurance. There's one flood insurance company to choose from. It's the federal government, which is where our medical system is moving towards because we're losing more and more insurance companies to choose from. There's no other thief to freedom than the national debt, because it's almost entirely caused by poorly run government that's funding an out of control bureaucratic state and elected officials who are pushing the agendas and narratives and bribing each other to vote for bills by hiding each other's pet projects and bridges to nowhere in it. Our national debt is becoming a noose around this country's neck. And our country cannot last with a debt ratio to GDP of 120%. No nation has ever survived it. This is another robber of freedom. And these is our national debt. And if we don't do something about it now, we're going to lose. There's no other. That's, I think, in my opinion, is one of our biggest robbers of freedom is our national debt. And we'll go down that rabbit hole later. It leads to another robber of freedom, which is, and I alluded to this a minute ago, these 1,000-page bills that grow government. They grow spending, and they have hidden new laws that get stuck in last minute, and they get hidden deep in the last pages so no one notices. But don't think that the wording that just happened to come up when they present these 1,000-page bills that are robbing our freedom because of so many things they packed inside of it. Don't think they just came up. Don't think that someone just came up with all of these things that they just stick in there last minute, like Obamacare that was written overnight, right? Which was a thief of freedom, by the way. A lot of this legislation that's getting stuck in these 1,000-page bills was written years ago, and it was stuck in a drawer in some file cabinet. It was just waiting for the right time to be put into a 1,000-page bill. The whole process makes some people rich, some more powerful, but it steals a lot of freedom for others. So those 1,000-page bills that they go, oh, we got to read it to see what's in it, or it's just so long that people don't have the time to read it. So they vote on it because they go, overall, this bill is going to fund this or fund the government for another week. One of the reasons why so many people get mad when these continuing resolutions get passed. Washington, D.C. and the federal government, no need to explain it there on how much freedom we're losing in D.C. with the federal government, as I've been pointing out with like the bureaucratic agencies and on, and the list goes on and on. But the other thing that I want to bring up that comes out of this are treaties with other countries. I know we need some. We need a good foreign policy. But when the treaties with other countries are based on the narratives, which is what they do, like global warming or the climate change, or they do based on the narratives like global warming or climate change, this hurts America and the freedoms that we have in this country. The Paris Climate Accord, for example, All of these things need to be learned and pointed out. We need to study these treaties, these foreign treaties and foreign pacts, just like we memorize all the narratives on a local level or in our country. We need to know them back and forwards, because when you find out what the WHO or the WEF wants in their treaties that threaten the sovereignty of the US, you're going to be on high alert. We need to be as vocal at that as we are about what is happening in our local levels on in our own country, because the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization want treaties that give them more power over the United States, and thereby taking away freedom and liberty from Americans. You need to be aware these things are going on, and I'm going to be doing more shows on this later, because this is another huge area where we're losing our freedom. What can we do? Get educated on these to help stop it from coming to America. You know, I've gone on about the national debt, and I want to kind of rehash that again. I don't need to go into great detail on this as I have on some more, but I got some more things for you to think about. It's a direct result of politicians who care more about an agenda than the future of our country. And it's part of a long, and our national debt is part of a long history of bad decisions. Our country is not going to last for long with the debt growing like this. I used to say that our children and our grandchildren are going to be paying the price of the debt. They're going to be paying for it. But the truth is that the chances of it collapsing on this generation is getting greater by the minute. I said this before, and I'm going to say it again. The US debt to GDP is about 120% right now. We cannot survive this, and neither will freedom, not to mention the inflationary taxes it's going to cause in the meantime. The national debt is not only robbing us of our money in the form of inflation, it will rob us of our freedom economically. And when we don't have the time to rest, because the time it will take to work to survive is another topic for another day. But when the government can't print enough money, or inflation is out of control and there is no other way out of no other way out, the government will not be here to save everyone. As a matter of fact, it's government's going to have to grab what it can from you. So economic and safety will be other freedoms lost, because when a society economically collapses, safety is a whole other issue, and you're going to have a hard time just surviving with what will come with a, let's just put it this way, the unrest that would come from a collapsing economy, which is where ours is headed for if we don't fix the national debt and reverse it in some way. And it's possible. Get rid of all these spending and funding of all these pet projects and the sneaking in of all these extra money bills or money, and get rid of some of bureaucracy. If we got rid of some of the bureaucratic agencies and a lot of the stuff that it did and downsized it, we would reverse much of our national debt. I know there's no specifics for that, nor am I giving you a lot of facts to prove that right now. These are all things that I've gotten the gist from in things that I've read, economists that I've listened to, but it can be done. It would just take a lot of work, and it's not as simple as I just made it sound. But the reality is, we have to find ways to downsize government, get rid of some of the programs, and fix some of the things that I've talked about, or we're going to face an economic collapse, because the national debt is not going to be able to, the economy is not going to be able to sustain itself with the weight of the national debt falling on it. Our border is our border. It's a mess. We know it. But not protecting our border is a violation of our Constitution. For the government to not protect our borders is yet not only a violation of our rights to freedom, but safety. in our country. And my point of bringing up the border is not just to be another voice talking about our problems at the border, not just to be another voice saying, look at our border, it's not being secure. But I want you to look at it another way. What about the freedoms being lost by the humans that are being trafficked across the border for all purposes, not just sex trafficking, but the harvesting of body parts? What about the people that become victims rather, or fall victim to the drugs coming across the border? Yes, you could say it was their choice to do drugs, but they were made more accessible, though, by our government in an environment where narratives and ideologies have become more important than education and morals. And what about the freedom of the families affected by this? What about the future of our country being infiltrated by people who are not invested in the future of America? Freedom is not a Republican thing or a Democrat thing. Everything I have discussed is affecting everyone, regardless of party, regardless of your ideological beliefs. We need to stop trying to take away each other's freedoms that we disagree with and work on getting past the news narratives that rob us of freedom. They condition us, the narratives do, that is, to what we can or cannot say, making us feel guilty to share our opinion, and taxes that they use to, I shall say, burden us. They condition us to what we can say. They make us feel guilty for it while they're taxing us, while they're inflationing us. Just made up that word, sorry. But they're doing this in a almost a collaborative way. We start to feel guilty about saying things because of the narratives, and as a result, they rob us of our Second Amendment right. That's right. You think that the Second Amendment gets, you know, um, taken from us because you can't say certain things? It's about thought also. When they create the narratives that make us feel guilty for sharing our opinion, they are in essence robbing our I'm sorry, I said our Second Amendment rights, our First Amendment rights. How dare I? Our First Amendment rights. Excuse me for a second. So I know you're probably thinking a minute ago, what was he thinking? Anyway, I got off track a little bit. I apologize. So they condition us to what we can think or not with the narratives, which is another way to rob our freedom of the First Amendment because we feel guilty about saying what we want to say. Taxes kill freedom. Need I say more? We got every kind of tax in the world in our country. The list goes on and on and on. You can't die without paying taxes. You can't you can't get married without paying taxes. You can't fish without paying taxes. Taxes are killing freedom. Sure, we need taxes to pave our roads and be able to defend our country. But the reality is, again, government gets used to the influx of money, gets used to printing the money, gets used to just being able to increase the national debt to be able to sustain itself and get all their other little freebies as they go. And they don't realize that it's a business. It's got to be done in a way that makes our future of our country sustainable financially. And when they're continuing to spend and raise the debt and raise our taxes, it's the perfect recipe for disaster. Another way that we're losing freedom is at the ballot box, or not at the ballot box. Voting, that is. By not voting, you hand over power back to the politicians and to the ballot harvesters. That's right. We're losing elections because of all of the registrations that don't vote. Those are the ones that the ballot harvesters use. And when you don't vote, the elected officials know what they can get away with. They know how many more of your freedoms they can steal because on national levels and local levels, don't think for 1 minute that politicians don't know who's voting and who's not, don't know how many people are voting. So when you get a voter turnout of 10% for a tax, they realize, the elected officials realize that they can spend your money because only 10% of the population in those areas care about it. So they are happily able to steal your freedoms because they know you're not paying attention. They know that not enough people care enough to go to the ballot box and vote. I got some other thoughts on this I'll share with you in a little bit. Another place that we're losing freedom is in our food chain via the Food and Drug Administration, bureaucratic agency that is. I know it's about safety. It's about public safety, having the right things that should be in our food and not. It's about safety, right? But think about how many preservatives they put in our food system here in America that they don't put in the food elsewhere in other countries. It's not just smart people that are figuring out what additives or preservatives that need to be put into our foods for public safety. It's also lobbyists for the drug companies and chemical companies that profit from those food preservatives being put into your food, and they get it put in. Even though we as humans, just like that old health insurance, we need to choose and pick carefully, in this case, healthy foods, in the other case, insurance. We need to be aware of it, personally responsible. But so many people put their trust into the system that they're trading their freedom for some food safety. Maybe, but it's at an expense to their health. But again, our government conditions us to believing that it is the answer, that it is there for our safety, it's there for our benefit with the Social Security system, with Medicare, Medicaid. But the reality is, when you look at what's happening in the agencies and all the local governments around us, we soon realize that the behemoth of government takes on a mind of its own that is not about freedom and liberties for the people. Most Americans feel they have freedom and are just too busy to realize where freedom's leaking from, or they're too busy to do anything about it. But the leaks are everywhere and they are all adding up. It's almost like socialism is sneaking up on us in disguise. Another place that we're losing our freedoms is in our court system. You think that is a place where our freedoms should be protected, but when activist judges make rulings and legislate from the bench, it's yet another way that we lose freedoms. Sure, the last judgment, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Trump not being taken off the ballot. And everybody cheers and everything for that, and that's great. I agree with that ruling. However, there's a lot of other rulings that come down from courts that are clearly from activist judges that are legislating from the bench, and you often wonder who they're connected to or where their orders are coming from. We are our own worst enemies to our freedom every time we decide not to be self-sufficient. We give up our freedoms every time we don't pay attention. And the reality is we don't have to do too much to be aware or make others aware or not repeating narratives, but by informing people with facts. We are our own worst enemies because we get caught up into repeating narratives and not being informed and not being involved in a positive solution based way by not pushing your beliefs and ideologies on others, but by giving people hope and talking rather about taking them to the solutions and talking about them instead of pushing your narratives on them or the hot topics or pushing the memes in front of people who don't agree with them. We are our own worst enemies by not showing up to vote. We are own our worst enemies in today's world by not making sure our friends are voting and bringing them to the ballot, to the polls, or calling them and reminding them to vote, because elections are not stolen by people who are voting. They are stolen with the registrations of people that don't vote. Freedom is being lost everywhere. And another reason it's not noticeable is that they aren't trying to take them away. They are just trying to make enough rules, regulations, and problems around them that we can't get to them. They are just kind of creating an environment where it's easier to give up than have hope. It's easier when the government creates narratives, it's easier to give up and not work and not be self sustaining. It's easier to rely on government. And they know that. And that's why they don't have to steal our freedoms. They just have to change our way of thinking. They just have to create enough rules and regulations and problems in bureaucratic agencies to make us give up that freedom. Make us realize, yeah, you know what? Okay, there's a little rule that says I can't have an arm brace on my gun, so okay, I just give it up. Which you gotta have to because it's a rule regulation that'll put you in jail or give you time for. But that's just one example. We have to look at losing freedom from other directions. We have to look at losing freedom in other ways, not just the First Amendment, not just the Second Amendment, but like I've explained here, through the bureaucratic agencies, school boards, debt, inflation. We got to look at the other ways and go down those rabbit holes just a little bit or a lot if you have the time to start looking for where we're losing freedom. Because when you start looking for freedom, you start to see the holes that it's leaking out of. You start realizing that our freedom is connected to more than we realize. You start looking at government from a freedom perspective, not as giving you freedom, but you start looking at it through the lens of freedom. Instead of trying to taking a freedom, or instead of trying to regulate freedoms that you don't agree with, let's try instead to make all freedom great again. And noticing where we're losing it and being informed and using that as a tool to not only bring others to the table that we can unite with to prevent it from happening even more. Thank you so much for tuning into my show. I really appreciate you spent this time with me. I would love it if you shared this podcast with somebody else, told them about me. Yeah, I know. I shout freedom and liberty all the time, and it sounds cliche-ish, and it sounds almost corny sometimes, and it's easy to say. But the reality is, the future of our country comes down to freedom, not just the freedom to live as you want, do as you want, free markets, capitalism. It's bigger than that. It's about the human spirit. The human spirit thrives on freedom. It's why God gave it to us. It's why God gave us free will, because he realizes that our human spirit thrives on freedom. And while government is easy to blame for it, and it's run by people, I think there's a sense of evil that runs through it, because the only way government can grow is when freedom shrinks. Think about that the next time you're sharing your freedoms with somebody else or talking with somebody else. Again, thank you so much for listening. Please share the podcast, like my pages, like my social media, Wallace for America on Twitter, William Wallace for America on Facebook. Find my pages, like me, and please, by all means, share it with somebody else. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Have a great night.